Good day, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Today we're continuing with the Average Folks in the Afterlife series, where I read from many of the old and not so old texts of psychic communication, revealing the many modes of transition and adaptation and just plain living in what we call the afterlife. I have a great number of these books, and probably far too many for one person to actually healthily absorb. But there you go. We all have our little obsessions, and that was one of mine. Before I started doing my own explorations. Anyway, today I'll read from two or three different ones. One is a book called Life, Death, and Consciousness by Filippo Leverziani. Book published 20, 30 years ago. It's originally in Italian. The English press edition is dated 1991 with no translator credited, I'm sorry to say. Anyway, very good book. Mr. Leverziani is a great researcher, has seemingly read just about everything, and it's a sort of an encyclopedic approach to the transition and life in the afterlife situations. And he quotes from many, many different texts. And today I'm going to use a few of his paragraphs to illustrate the challenges and difficulties that spirits can face when trying to communicate shortly after their transition to their friends and loved ones. As I say, he is quoting from other books. As researchers are wont to do. Having passed over only recently, quote-unquote, Daddy was wondering whether his friend Peckham had heard the news of his demise. In actual fact, Peckham had been very ill at the time, so that the sad news had been kept from him. While he was pondering the problem, Daddy heard the voice of another entity, his spirit guide, who told him, think of him, mentally concentrate upon him, and you will then see him. Following this advice, Daddy immediately had the impression that he was falling through space, passing through some very thick fog. When Daddy's fall came to a halt at a place where the fog was clearing, he could see the Peckhams just as if he were looking at them with his physical eyes, and from only a short distance away. They were taking a leisurely stroll along the waterfront of a seaside resort. Quote, I called out to him, Peckham, old chap, I'm dead. This is for real. He looked around with a startled air, appearing to have heard me. Then the mist enveloped me again for a while, and when it dispersed, I found myself once more in my own domain. Peckham was at the seaside resort to convalesce. At that time he had not yet heard the news of his friend's death, and therefore learnt it in this fashion. Another episode useful by way of example is the one in which the entity Julia Ames manifests herself to her friend Elena, whom she was wont to call by the more familiar name of Hoodie. Now this is from a book is possibly more than 100 years old. Hoodie, I tell you. Familiar name of Hoodie, still alive in incarnate form. The two women had made a pact that the one who died first was to try and manifest herself to the other. Elena tells us that on 2 occasions she had woken up with a start and seen her friend seemingly alive and smiling. On both occasions Julia had remained perfectly visible though silent for several minutes, but had then become transparent and eventually disappeared, leaving in her place a kind of luminous pillar that likewise disappeared a little later. It had seemed to Elena that Julia wanted to give her a message, or at least say something, but had not succeeded in doing so. Let us now see how that same incident is reported by the other party, the entity Julia. Her account will give us quite a detailed idea of the kind of problem that arises, so let us give the floor to Julia. Quote, "It is not an easy thing to manifest, except under very favorable conditions. For my part, I have manifested in many ways. The first two were to Hoodie. After that, I have manifested myself to Mrs. B at the materialization seance. I have manifested myself to the photographer and some other cases. But in all, it requires an effort, and the effort cannot be maintained beyond a certain point. And in the case of a prolonged manifestation, that is to say for half an hour upwards, it is necessary to obtain the cooperation of many on this side. You will notice that even in materializing seances where the conditions are good, visitors from this side soon take their departure. And in ordinary apparitions, the vision is almost momentary. I was held several minutes for Hoodie to see me, but that is rare. Usually we can make the picture visual for a moment or two, then it dissolves away. To make the picture is the easiest and the most common. To make it speak is rarer, and to make it touchable and apparently solid as well as vocal and visible is the hardest of all. And as much force is required to materialize, there is seldom enough left to speak with. For the photographing there is less difficulty, for the finer substance can be used to reflect the light rays so as to affect the plate. But unless you have favorable conditions on your side, we can do little or nothing on this side." End quote. The concrete problem that Julia had to face in manifesting herself to her friend Hoodie was that of making the picture, because Hoodie was not a clairvoyant. Julia received the following advice from another and more expert entity. Quote, "The secret is simple, but do not despise it for its simplicity. Think earnestly, steadfastly, think the picture, the form, the appearance of your former self. When that is done, take it with you and wait for the timely moments when the spiritual senses of the recipient are not clogged or darkened by the whirling vibrations of mundane care. Then you will find that you will be seen." The whirling vibrations of mundane care. That is what holds many people back from hearing communications, otherwise known as grieving. A little later on, a couple of pages later, he's talking about more communicating spirits finding another way to mentally communicate. As far as mediumistic communications are concerned, it is widely and frequently attested that the communicating entity will succeed far better in its intentions when, rather than dictating each individual word of the message, it simply concentrates on the basic ideas and allows the words to come of their own accord. That is to say, allows the words to form spontaneously in the unconscious psyche of the medium, thus left wholly free to operate in its own way. Indeed, it is in this sense that a communicating spirit, brackets another fallen soldier in the First War, observed that he finds it easier to communicate the substance of his thoughts when he leaves the medium free to couch them in his own words. Here is how he puts it. Quote, "Thought I would get that through better if I let him do the talking. You see, I just rolled up the ideas and let him get hold of them and roll them out in his well-known literary style." My style isn't perhaps as well known, but that is how I receive messages, like little thought balls. Their ideas, my vocabulary. Now, I believe we've read from Elsa Barca's 1913 Letters from the Light. Great book, one of my faves, and I advise you all to get several copies and give them to your friends. It's probably late for Christmas now. It's almost Christmas Eve, but you know, in January. So here's letter number 36, an empty china cup. It is no wonder that children, no matter how old and experienced their souls, have to be retaught in each life the relative values of all things, according to the artificial standards of the world. For out here those values lose their meaning. That a soul had houses, lands, and honors among men does not increase his value in our eyes. We cannot hope to profit by his discarded riches. The soul in the hereafter builds his own house, and the materials thereof are free as air. If I use the house which another has built, I miss the enjoyment of creating my own. Although I would add at this point, it is quite possible to, you sign on a little list and you get an empty house, just like here. Because when people go to a certain level, build their house, live there for a while, sometimes a while might be many years, they might move to a higher level, leaving that house empty. Or they might reincarnate. Or they might go to a nirvana type level where they have no body and no need for a house. So there are options here. Just thought I'd mention that. There is nothing worth stealing out here, so no one trembles for fear of burglars in the night. Even bores can be escaped by retiring to the very center of oneself, for a bore is himself too self-centered ever to pierce to the center of anyone else. Smart advice there. On earth you value titles inherited or acquired. Here a man's name is not much importance even to himself, and a visiting card would be lost through the cracks in the floor of heaven. No footman angel would ever deliver it to his lord and master. One day I met a lady recently arrived. She had not been here long enough to have lost her assurance of superiority over ordinary men and angels. That morning I had on my best Roman toga, for I had been reliving the past. And the lady, mistaking me for Caesar or some other ancient aristocrat, asked me to direct her to a place where gentlewomen congregated. I was forced to admit that I did not know of any such resort, but as the visitor seemed lonely and bewildered, I invited her to rest beside me for a time and to question me if she wished. I have been here several months, I said, and I have gained a considerable experience. It was plain to see that she was puzzled by my remark. She glanced at my classical garments, and I could feel her thinking that there was something incongruous between it and my assertion that I had been here only a few months. Perhaps you are an actor, she said. We are all actors here, I replied. This seemed to puzzle her more than ever, and she said that she did not understand. Poor lady, I felt sorry for her, and I tried my best to explain to her the conditions under which we live. You must know in the first place, I said, that this is the land of realized ideals. Now a man who has always desired to be a king can play the part up here if he wishes to, and no one will laugh at him, for each spirit has some favorite dream which he acts out to his own satisfaction. We have, madam, reacquired the tolerance and courtesy of children, who never ridicule one another's play. Is heaven merely a playroom? She asked, in a sharp tone. Not at all, I answered, but you are not in heaven. Her look of apprehension caused me immediately to ask, nor are you in hell. What was your religion upon the earth? Why, I professed the usual religion of my country and station, but I never gave it much thought. Perhaps the idea of purgatory is not unfamiliar to you. I am not a papist, she said, with some warmth. Nevertheless, a papist in your position would conceive himself to be in purgatory. I am certainly not happy, she admitted, because everything is so strange. Have you no friends here? I must have many acquaintances, she said, but I never cared for intimate friendships. I used to entertain a good deal. My husband's political position demanded it. Perhaps there is someone on this side to whom you were specially kind at some time or other, someone whose grief you helped to bear, whose poverty you erased. No, whose poverty you eased. I patronized our religious charities. I fear that that sort of help is too impersonal to be remembered here. Have you no children? No brothers or sisters on this side. I quarreled with my only brother for marrying beneath him. But surely, I said, you must have had a mother. Was she not waiting for you when you came over? No. This surprised me, for I had been told that all mother spirits who have not gone back to the world know by a peculiar thrill when a child to which they have given birth is about to be reborn in the spiritual world. a sort of sympathetic afterpain, the final and sweetest reward of motherhood. Then she must have reincarnated, I said. Oh, do you hold to that pagan belief? The lady inquired with just a touch of superiority. I thought that only queer people, theosophists and such, believed in reincarnation. I was always queer, I admitted. But you know, of course, dear madam, that about 3/4 of the Earth's inhabitants are familiar with that theory in some form or other. We continued our talk for a little time, and meanwhile I was puzzling my heart as to what I could do to help this poor woman, for whom no one was waiting. I passed in mental review this and that ministering angel of my acquaintance, and wondered which of them would be considered most correct from the conventional earthly point of view. The noblest of them was usually at the sight of some newly arrived unfortunate woman, to use a euphemism of that polite society which my latest protégé had frequented. The others were here, there, and everywhere, but generally with those souls who needed them most, while the need of my present companion was more real than urgent. If Lionel had been here, he might have entertained her for a while. I wish that I had cultivated the acquaintance of some of those ladies who crochet and gossip in this world as they crocheted and gossiped in yours. Do not be shocked. Did you fancy that a lifelong habit could be laid aside for a moment? Laid aside in a moment. As women on earth dream often of their knitting, so do they here. It is as easy to knit in this world as it is to dream in yours. Understand that the world in which I now live is no more essentially sacred than is the world in which you live, nor is it any more mysterious to those who dwell in it. To the serious souls all conditions are sacred, except those that are profane. And both are found out here as well as on earth. But to return to the lonely woman, I was still wondering what I should do with her when looking up, I saw the teacher approaching. He had with him another woman, as like the first as one empty china cup is like another empty china cup. Then he and I went away and left the two together. I did not know, I said to the teacher, that you troubled yourself with any souls but those of considerable development. He smiled. It was your perplexity which I came to relieve, not that of those poor ladies. Then he began to talk to me about relative values. In a sense, one soul is as much worth helping as another. In a deeper sense, perhaps it is not. Do not think that I am indifferent to the sufferings of the weakest ones because I give my time and attention to the strong. Like the ministering angels, I go where I am most needed. Only the strong ones can learn what I have to teach. The weak ones are the charges of the messiahs and their followers. But nevertheless, between us and the messiahs, there is brotherhood and there is mutual understanding. Each works in his own field. The messiahs help the many, we help the few. Their reward in love is greater than ours, but we do not work for reward any more than they do. Each follows the law of his being. To be loved by all men, a teacher must be known to all men, and we reveal ourselves only to a few chosen ones. Why do we not go the way of the messiahs? Because the balance must be maintained. For every great worker in sight of men, there is another worker out of sight. What kind of teacher is of the greatest value? The question is out of order. The north and south are interdependent, and there are two poles to every magnet. Nice bit of philosophy there. Jürgen's You, Multidimensional Man. Great book, contemporary book of out-of-body experience and lucid dreaming. And I might also add that Jürgen has a great website of the same name, Multidimensional Man, on which you can read more and see more, because in some of the video interviews you can see some of his lovely paintings of his visits to various parts of the afterlife worlds. Really well worth your time checking that out. So, Multidimensional Man. Towards the end of the book, he concentrates a lot on the more heavenly levels, paradise levels. I was dreaming of diving in and out of traffic in a big city. In my frustration, I lifted up into the air, and at that moment I became lucid. I kept rising high above the city. As I sailed eagle-like across the sky, I observed the most beautiful panoramic landscapes. The crescent-shaped city was at the mouth of a huge river, pouring its mighty waters into the ocean. Beyond the city were mountains reaching miles high, stretching as far as the eye could see. The vastness and splendor of the landscape was breathtaking. It was so beautiful that I lingered in the air, taking in the sights, planning to make a mental impression to bring back to earth in order to paint it. Then, without warning, a tremendous supernatural force plucked me out of midair and carried me away with frightening speed. I had no power over it. I tried to see what was happening or where I was being taken, but everything was black. I couldn't see a thing. I started to panic and found myself fighting and resisting the force sweeping me into the unknown. Slowly the force relented and abandoned me in a place familiar and close to home in England. I had a strong feeling of regret and wondered what might have happened had I surrendered to the force, just allowed myself to go with it. With this thought in mind, the same force picked me up again and in no time at all dumped me into an environment so alien that I spent ages trying to identify any features that would remind me of anything I had seen before. Gradually, as my eyes adjusted, shapes of unrecognizable objects emerged out of the vagueness. I seemed to be on an alien planet. I saw what resembled a body of water, but it wasn't water. It was a crystalline liquid mass, shimmering and shining. The objects floating on or hovering above it could be described as flowers, but they were not flowers. Similar plant-like entities grew around the pond and seemed to be on fire. Flames were coming out of their roots, but it was not fire. It was an iridescent light rising from the ground and up through the stems. The thing that was most striking of all was the indescribable beauty, the harmony that the objects created among themselves and with their environment, and the sounds that rained down on the scene, together with the cascading lights emanating from the crystalline pond. The crystals were of an indefinable color, which one moment I thought was silver and bluish, and the next getting darker toward the center of the pond, acquiring a rich, deep violet. Pearlescence doesn't do it justice. The borders between what was sight and sound became blurred, and what a moment ago was a liquid object moving in harmony with its surrounding turned out to be a sound with a shape. And so I was never quite certain whether it was a sound I saw or a color with a shape I heard. Drawn by, as if by irresistibly intense magic, I moved closer to the pond, while the sounds became more enchanting, sweetly luring me into their midst. What could have been interpreted as a cacophony of sounds was in fact a grand symphonic masterpiece. I floated toward the edge, weaving between big burning stems and waving shapes, which sent showers of color like sparks into the air every time I brushed past them. Unlike dandelions, their abundance of seeds was never exhausted, and instead drew new breath from the fertile earth on which they grew. And onward we go with such heavenly experiences, and we will return to this book on our next episode. So much beauty and transcendence is available in it. Jürgen's You, Multidimensional Man. Well, friends, another episode in Average Folks in the Afterlife. And I hope you enjoyed that. And number 6 will hopefully rapidly be followed by number 7. And until then, so long. And may all your dreams of being out of body be thrilling. Au revoir.